Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is a meeting of the Policy and Regulatory Committee to hear submissions and make recommendations on the livestock movement bylaw. It's Monday, the 4th of April at 9:30. Thank you, everybody, for being so prompt. Do we have any apologies at all? Councillor Church?
Councillor Henderson for lateness.
Thank you very much. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Thompson, thank you. All in favour, raise a hand. Thank you very much. Carried. Confirmation of the status of the agenda, and that includes receiving the reports 4.1, the hearings report, and 4.2, the deliberations report. Can I have a mover, please, for that? Councillor Wallerton, thank you, and Councillor Patterson. All in favour, raise a hand. Thank you very much. Are there any disclosures of interest that anybody needs to declare for this meeting? No, would appear not. Okay, so Hannah, over to you in terms of where you want to take it from here before our first submitter, which we do have 5 submitters after Hannah's speaking.
Morning, councillors. I'll just provide a brief overview of the hearings report. So today we have the hearing and deliberation for the proposed Livestock Movement Bylaw 2022. This bylaw sets out rules for moving stock safely and identifies when council permits are required for moving stock on or across roads. Council previously had a livestock movement bylaw which lapsed several years ago. The proposed bylaw was consulted on between 20 September 2021 and 29 November 2021, and the submission timeframe was extended due to COVID-19 restrictions in place at the time. Council received 15 submissions and 6 submitters requested to speak. One of these submitters subsequently declined when contacted by staff, so we have 5 submitters speaking this morning. Deliberations are scheduled to commence immediately after the council hearing. I'll pass it back to you, Councillor Cedric.
Thank you very much. That was short and sweet, and I think it probably encapsulates an awful lot of hard work that's gone on from the ill-fated previous bylaw. And a lot of that has gone, the credit has gone to councillors Smith, Patterson and Wallerton, who as a working group have done an awful lot of really good listening and discussions across the communities. Councillor Smith, did you have any comment that you wanted to say before we go to our first submitter?
On behalf of my colleagues, thank you for those comments, but I'd also like to endorse the working relationship that developed with Federated Farmers. It was open, transparent, and we all looked to a common goal with the safe movement of livestock across and along roads and the safety of other road users. So my thanks on behalf of the team to them as well. Just as a start-up, Madam Chair, there was a couple of errors in the consultation document. Firstly, the issue of on page 11 on the livestock movement, the 400 metres, I think clause 11, the committee did not support that inclusion, and it should have been removed. And I'll talk more about that during the livestock crossing when it comes up, because that's covered under the definition of a livestock crossing, and just may seek support for bringing that definition with appropriate words into the livestock crossing conditions, but we'll be supporting the removal of it from the movement, because obviously most stock, when they're moved or under droving, go far further than 400 metres. The other issue is the age, where there has been quite a bit of submission around the removal of the proposed 16 years of age. We are happy to support the provision being modified to competent persons, and that's covered under the Health and Safety and Employment Act and the responsibility of the permit holder as a PCBU. So we will be supporting that. There's some other issues that come up throughout the the submissions, and we will make appropriate comments during the deliberations on those. But all in all, very grateful to the support from our submitters and once again to Federated Farmers. And I think we're in a far better position going forward today. So hopefully we will land with a bylaw that everyone supports. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hannah, do we have our first submitter? It's Federated Farmers, I believe.
Yes, I believe we do. So submitted 2153 Federated Farmers. We have Sean Hazelton, Alan Cole, Jackie Hunn and Wendy Clark, and their submission is on page 12 of the agenda.
Thank you, Hannah. That was very well done.
Hi there, sorry. There's a recommendation on page 5 of the agenda, just so we can hear all the submitters.
Right. So I'm happy to move that.
I'll second it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. All in favour? Thank you very much. Against? No. So carried. Yes, and I understand there is also another submission further on, recommendation further on. Thank you, Mr. Westfield. Right. So we can see you there, some Federated Farmers. Sorry, but we can't see your faces. Thank you, Mr. Cole. You've now arrived. Mr. Hazelton. Hello, Alan. And Ms. Hahn, thank you. Is that the three? That's the three we're expecting?
Is there Wendy potentially too? Wendy Clark?
Don't see her.
It came up a moment ago.
Yep, coming in now.
Cool. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so I presume did you hear the preamble that Councillor Smith gave as a result of the working group discussions?
No, sorry.
Okay.
I couldn't see the YouTube link either, so I think we've just signed in now to start hearing.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Smith, two sentences in summary, just two, and not long ones.
No, I appreciate that, and they can review the video later. But look, we enjoyed working with the Federated Farmers, and look, would pass on our thanks for the attitude and transparency of working together. It was a good outcome, and whilst there's some submission points here, I think it's way further ahead than we were 11 years ago. So look forward to the day and getting a bylaw that we can all support. So yeah, our thanks from the council working group to the Federated Farmers. Thank you.
So just before you start, we have read your submission. We do understand that the questions would be only of matter of clarification, but next 10 minutes are all yours. So
Perfect.
who's up?
Yep.
Mr. Hazelton,
yep.
You're starting. Excellent.
I'll take it away, I guess. Of course, yeah, thanks again, everyone, for having us here today. And yeah, we just want to again thank you for the, I guess, open and transparent consultation period that we've had through this. I guess it's been a long time coming, and I've come in a bit late, but no, it's good to be here finally. So with me here today, we have Alan, Jackie, and Wendy. So Alan and Jackie are the Waikato and Auckland provincial presidents who represent the council's boundary members. And Wendy is also on the Auckland executive and has been following this bylaw since the get-go. So yeah, we've got good experience dealing with livestock movement bylaws throughout New Zealand and have a strong understanding on what's been done that does and doesn't work for our members from other examples around the country. So firstly, it's key to note that no livestock activity is the same. These change farm to farm, road to road, and our members are at best point of call to react and make procedures which manage and mitigate these adverse effects to a road corridor. Safe and effective livestock movement is important for farmers who are also bound by health and safety legislation, NZTA's Code of Practice, which is best practice for livestock movement, and also animals welfare requirements. We have identified a few areas in the bylaw which we really agree with and like, and a few that we'd prefer to have amended for practicality reasons for our members and their situation. We also note that there's a few track changes that have already been made, which propose to change some of our concerns that we're going to outline again today. Although more stringent than other councils, we do support the decision-making matrix allowing permitted activities on certain roading networks. We are also in support of the inclusion of the emergency and escape livestock clause, which is the main safety issues for road users in the district from our review of statistics, roading crash statistics information. Running through our main points in our submission, I'll start at clause 8.5. So Federated Farmers refers to the condition stating the permit will be revoked. We just deem this a bit critical and harsh and not allowing for situations where drovers can improve or implement changes to satisfy our concerns. And we also feel it's necessary to remove this, and it is already catered for in clause 11. So we see that this change has already been made under the proposal. Drover's age. We also have concerns around the signalling of an age, which has little impact on the handler's ability to manage livestock appropriately. Most of our members would say they'd rather have their 14-year-old son or daughter helping shift the stock over a middle-aged man that's grown up in central Auckland with no experience of livestock. This creates just a technical non-compliance issue when road safety will not be impacted from age. This can easily be amended, as already done, to rely on the definition for a competent person used in legislation like the Health and Safety Act. The next area is the 400-metre permit limit, which I've also seen has been suggested to be changed. Federated Farmers does have the concerns around the 400-metre limit for livestock movement permits. Farmers in many situations will move stock well above that 400-metre limit. Council already has the ability to accept or decline permits, so the distance should not be a consideration looked at on its own. The permit should be accepted or declined on the merits of the traffic management plan prepared for the activity and whether it's suitable for the distance on the road that it's being conducted on. Livestock permit timeframes. So we just wish to seek more certainty for our members with relation to livestock droving and crossing permits. Federated Farmers feels that a 5-year timeframe will be reasonable for both council and applicants who spend considerable time and money on their livestock movement activities. And the final section we just want to talk about today is under the Offences and Penalties section. We just noticed there's an introduction of clause 16.2, which I looked at earlier this morning. So we understand the intent of section 16.2. We do feel that there needs to be mention for the Land Transport Act 1998 beside the Local Government Act 2002. We seek this be amended to include the Local Land Transport Act 1998, just to be consistent with, I guess, where liability can come from. Yeah, and other than that, yeah, thanks for your time, and yeah, feel free to ask any questions of myself or the team with us. Cool, thank you.
Extremely clear. Thank you, Mr. Hazelton. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Shame you missed the introduction that I did before you came on. So my question relates to the livestock crossing permit. You commented in the submission about the moving permit in the 400 metres. The council negotiating team supports that, and you'll see the changes proposed. However, the livestock crossing permit, if you look at the definition in the bylaw, under definitions, it says the livestock crossing permit is a time-specific permit allowing for the movement of livestock across a road between gates, which are generally opposite each other or are at a maximum distance of 100 metres from each other. So generally a crossing is to go across the road straight or slightly diagonally, but no more than 100 metres. The question I put to you is, would Federated Farmers be happy with the appropriate words from that definition being put into the crossing section, which is the conditions for crossings as opposed to movement? So can I put that to you? Do you understand the question, hopefully?
I think so. So I was looking at the track changes for the livestock crossing permit, which is, I guess, clause 8.1, where it's changed from moving to permit. And are you suggesting that you would like to add the distance into the crossing permit as well?
Yeah, so yes, insofar as the crossing permit reflects what the definition is in the interpretation section or clause 4, so that it more clearly emphasises that crossing should be done more or less straight across from one gate across the road to another, although up to 100 metres is deviation.
Yes, yeah, we'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely would agree with support that being added.
Thank you very much, team. Yeah, that's all the questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for this group of people? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one, I may have missed it, but just on your point 10 about the time frame of 5 years for a permit, is there any clauses around transferability? Say, for instance, a farm sold?
I guess it would be quite reasonable for it to be based on, unless Alan would suggest otherwise, but it'd be quite reasonable for a new livestock, I guess, someone that's purchased a new property to apply for his own permit. I don't really understand the complexities of this for staffing reasons, if they can do that or not, but I guess it would come down to what your council staff can and can't do as well with regards to that.
Madam Chair, Ms Hahn has a comment as well.
So when I've looked through the Waikato district councils, so firstly, yeah, it's normal that you can transfer a permit when you sell a property. The new owner can transfer that permit straight across. So that's the time the council can review that one. But and the other point I'd like to make is that the time frame, is the smallest time frame is 5 years, and some of them are 10 years or more, or straight permitted activity. Just going by the NZTA.
Thank you, Ms Hahn. That's helpful. Councillor Beck, and then Mayor Allen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just really picking up on the point you make in your submission around neighbouring councils and making sure where a farm is immediately bordering another territorial authority or possibly even straddling the boundaries of different territorial authorities. You refer to Auckland and Waikato Federated Farmers. Just a question, does the Waikato take into account the bordering to the south of Waipa and to the east with I guess it's Matamata-Piaka and Hauraki and so on, so there's no sort of conflicts there, no additional confusions created there?
We recently discussed with Auckland Transport, who are also consulting on their I guess it was different but the same sort of bylaw, and they sort of rectified that there was a sort of mutual agreement between councils with boundary roads that support each other. So I think that rectified that, if Alan could agree with that or not, but yeah. So that was done. That was, yeah, so we
any others, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
We haven't really I haven't reviewed if there's conflict issues with Waipa itself, but yeah, particularly
Ms
around
Clark, you have a comment?
Yeah, I've got a comment. If there is a joint boundary that a farmer is crossing, it is beholden on the farmer to be familiar with both bylaws and to make sure that he abides by the conditions of the more stringent bylaw.
That's helpful, thank you. Mayor Allen?
Morning, everybody. How are you all? Hey, question, and any one of you can answer this. Give me a definition of competency.
do you want me to go?
Well, one of yous.
Yes, I guess someone that's been trained or educated and that's competent in the activities aids undertaking. So I guess it would come down to experience, and also if you've been suitably trained, or I guess what would you call it, drilled, I guess, and what you're about to do.
Okay, so let me give you an example, and just remember, I'm a farmer too.
Yeah.
So not like everybody on the screen. So I judge competency on ability. Yes, that's dead right. But then again, I've met people my age are still not competent too. So at what they're trying to do. So, for example, you know, if you're wanting to take the age out of 16, so we associate competency with an age group, as we do with driver's license at the age of 15, and they seem to be competent enough and understand enough to actually drive a vehicle on a road with other people. So the way I look at it as somebody who has driven a lot of cattle on the road over the years myself, I look towards competency. So as a farmer, I looked and I've got a couple of 8-year-old boys that I think are competent. You really think that they're competent enough to be perhaps on a bike, a quad or whatever in front or behind cattle, dealing with the public in a lot of cases? Because that's what it opens it up to. And that's what worries me. I'm still of a mind there needs to be an age. It doesn't have to be 16, but I would associate, and look, my kids were no different. They're brought up on the farm, and I would say my kids around the farm were probably pretty competent at moving stock and doing things from at the age of 11 or 12. It doesn't have to be 16, but some farmers may interpret competency to mean that my 5 or 6-year-old could do it too. So that would then expose them and us to a situation, if something went wrong, that we don't want to endure. And I have seen those situations. So, you know, I just think that we need to think seriously before we just play on the word of competency other than an age group.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. And I think I'll have to refer back to the, sorry, I don't have it on me at the moment, but I did find the definition under the Health and Safety Act, which I guess the likes of the groups of WorkSafe and whatnot would consider, which I guess they would be triggered if there was an incident on the road, which would trigger for, I guess, a workplace review if there's a health and safety issue as well. But I do agree with that, and it's finding the line, because in certain cases, I know if people were relief milking, there'd be 15-year-olds that would be out relief milking, and they would have to potentially help cross dairy cattle across the road. But yeah,
Mr. Hazelton, I think thank you. We are out of time, and I actually did have a question, but I can ask it of another submitter. Just in terms of that last topic, I can assure you that will be the topic of a lot of deliberation. So please rest assured on that. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was clear, it was sensible, and it was an absolute pleasure. So thank you for the group that worked to put it together on your side, and I think it shows that common sense and collaboration can go an awful long way in this world. So I do personally thank you for that. So all up, thank you very much, and we will move to our next submitter now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next submitter is Bruce Cameron, and he is on his submission can be found on page 18 of the agenda.
Thank you very much.
Can I just ask a question while Mr. Cameron's coming on? The previous submitters going into a waiting room, or have they gone altogether? Of democracy.
They've gone to a waiting room.
Thank you.
And can they hear in the waiting room, or are they listening on YouTube?
No, well, if they're in the waiting room, can they hear what's going on?
No.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Horsfield, maybe you could just let them know that they can listen to it on YouTube while they're in there.
Yeah, and I can send them the link.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Evening, morning. Am I there?
Not good evening, Mr. Cameron. You are here in audio, but not in real life. We can't see you. So you need to turn your, there you go. And I have to tell you, I do find it very confusing when people come onto the screen and then and it is not your fault by any means, but they shoot all around the screen until they settle into a place, and it's very hard to keep track of you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your submission. We have read your submission, and we're very happy to hear from you over the next 10 minutes. So all yours, Mr. Cameron.
Thank you, Council, and thank you for the opportunity to present. This has been a long time, as I think as you all appreciate. And at the end of this, hopefully I can clean out a corner of my office with all the files dealing with this particular issue. It is rather large. One of the things, I'm pleased to where it's got, and again, as you've acknowledged with Federated Farmers, the work that's gone in has certainly been very good, and also to Wendy Clark, who's been there right from the very beginning. There's been a huge amount of work go into this. I'm very pleased to see the matrix where that's got to. I think there could be a little bit more on the permitted activity side, but it's certainly better from when it very first started, which I think the roading engineer at the time, Ian Gooden, he couldn't actually explain it to council himself. Whereas where it's got to now, as I take it with Ross Bayer, his input has come up to something much more sensible, readable, understandable, and that's appreciated. Re the moving permits, I think I'm not against applying for the permit, applying to that matrix, but the all the roads, the mention that you need a permit for, the conditions involved. Once I think all that's presented to the person, that's applying for a permit, that I don't believe they should necessarily have to identify all the roads that they're going on. They know all the roads are listed in the schedule that you've attached to the bylaw, so that they get that, meet all the conditions, and that should be fine. And I take note, we haven't actually had a livestock bylaw for a number of years now, and to the best of my knowledge, there's been virtually no incidents on the road. So obviously the farmers have been very good. I also noticed on your road names index, it says quite a bit, on some of the roads, 1 to 6 times per week, but no more than 7 times per week. More than 7 times a week is prohibited. To be consistent with the bylaw, that should be changed to more than 7 times per week on average per year, to be consistent with the other wording of the bylaw. Competency of a person, which the Mayor has mentioned. And as he also mentioned, somebody at the age of 70 by the law could be deemed to be competent, whereas somebody at the age of 10 is much more competent than the person at 20. At 70, I look at the farmer himself is going to be looking at the person dealing with the stock on the road. If they've got their son or daughter who's young on the road, they're not going to put them in a dangerous situation. And also they're not going to put their stock, the value of the stock are exceptionally valuable. So they're going to make sure that this job is done right. So I fully support the definition, using the word competency, which has been used in the drive. You've only got to be competent to drive the livestock on the road, and I feel the same should apply to crossing stock on road. Should be deemed as competent. Otherwise, as I said, I fully support Federated Farmers. The time limit for a permit, I feel, should be a minimum of 5 years, because under Section 11, it can be revoked at any time anyway. Farmers need that to for some certainty when they're doing stuff, and why waste the farmer's time or the council time having to reapply for shorter permits all the time. I think that's pretty much it. So any questions I can be of assistance with?
Pardon me, Mr. Cameron, I do have a question, and that is related to signage, which I notice most submitters have commented on, and I wondered if you could just clarify your position on that.
The signage, are you talking as in permanent signage?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. The cost of these signs is rather large, and and it's up to using the council staff or contractor to put them up. In my own example, where signs have gone up on the side of the road, I've had to get them to move them because they've been put in a dangerous position, which they've come and moved. So as a local, user of the road, I know the speed of the traffic, I know what they go at, and I know better placement of signs, and I feel what a lot of the council staff or contractors have done. And also the cost of them, and when they get damaged or destroyed, to keep having to get the contractor or that to come back and put them up all the time, that gets a very expensive exercise, and the farmer should be able to do that himself.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask the same questions I asked the feds. Good morning, Bruce. The submissions have picked up that in the movement conditions, there is a restriction relating to 400 metres, not being able to move stock along the road for more than 400 metres. That's an error and was supposed to have been removed. However, looking at the definition of a road permit, the crossing, it talks about time-specific permit allowing movement of livestock across the road, generally gates opposite each other, or are a maximum of 100 metres from each other. So I am going to ask you, would you support the inclusion in the crossing conditions and the appropriate clause that council emphasises that definition, that the crossing should be generally across the road or no more than 100 metre deviation left or right, and it is removed, any reference to distance is removed from the moving permit. Would you support that at all?
Yes, I would, definitely. Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your submission, Bruce. Just in respect of signage, and I'm referring to temporary signage. Now, I'm aware that there are potentially permit holders that have left their temporary signage out. We're not moving stock, and whether that is an education, maybe not being quite so proactive, and the temporary signage left out becomes a hazardous in its own right, because then obviously we start disregarding that signage. I just note in this bylaw that there's not any specific mention of removing that temporary signage when not in use. And I know it might be stating the obvious, but have you got any thoughts on what we can do about educating or making those farmers aware removing their temporary signage is just as important as getting it out?
Totally agree, Councillor Eyre, that signs are out all the time. Like most signs, permanent signs on the road, you actually, when they've been there for so long, you don't actually see them. And whereas a temporary sign is good as a temporary sign because when it's put out, it's new, it's seen. That's obviously for the local users, not I'll say outsider users of the road. Again, I think that's an education thing, really, because it's in the farmer's best interest that the livestock, that attention is brought to them. I know I put a moving stock on roads. I put a road cone, if I'm moving them a distance, I'll put a road cone out with a sign on it. And then once the stock are moved, I take it away again because it is half pie on the road anyway, being on a metal single lane road anyway. So it's obvious and it needs to be removed. So I think it comes back down to an education thing.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. If, are there any more questions for Mr. Cameron? No, it would appear that you have been very, very clear. Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate that you take the time to come and talk to us, and also the effort that's gone into this. So thank you, Mr. Cameron.
That's right. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm actually on holiday at the moment. I'm sitting at the beach, so something else calls me quite strongly.
I can imagine it would do. Well, you go answer that call. Just for anybody who is watching this or any of our live streams, I want to point out that you may think that councillors are not paying attention. In fact, the majority of us use two screens. So one screen has your submission on it, and generally the second screen has the camera. So if you see people looking to one side or looking down, that's what they're doing. In my case, I have 3 screens and a timer, which is why my head is going round and round in circles. But I just want to make it really, really clear that everybody is engaged in what they're doing and listening to you. If they're just looking away, they are looking away at your submission just to be reinforcing what you're saying. So I need to repeat that probably, and we need to repeat it pretty much in all our meetings. Ms. Bevan, our next submitter.
Yes, our next submitter is Wendy Clark, and her submission is on page 20 of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Just looking away, they are looking away at your submission just to be reinforcing what we're saying. So, hello, Ms. Clark. You probably need to turn your YouTube off if it's you that's got the YouTube on. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Hello, and we're all ready for you. Thank you. Nice to see you back again. And we have your submission. We've read your submission. So we're interested in your thoughts on it over the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. So,
all yours.
Good morning, members of the council. So my name is Wendy Clark. I'm a dairy farmer, and I'm experienced in moving stock on roads. I've negotiated 3 different bylaws, and I am familiar with the history of this particular bylaw. I monitored the safety record of supervised stock movements on Waikato roads from 2000 to 2016. And in those 16 years, all accidents, except for 2, involved stray animals. The 2 exceptions occurred at supervised crossings, and both were minor. So I want to congratulate you for getting the bylaw to this point, and I support its intent and its provisions, with a few exceptions, which I'll touch on in a moment. First, I'd like to commend Council on the simplicity of the matrix, which gives stock owners a clear picture of whether they need a permit to move the stock. And I also commend Council for allowing some permitted activity, provided the conditions of the bylaw are met. I would have liked to have seen more, because the fewer permits that need to be processed, the more efficient it is for both council and farmer. But hey, it's workable. I support a 5-year term for permits. 5 years gives certainty to stock owners who may have considerable investment attached to their ability to access land by crossing a road, crossing or moving down a road. Currently, the bylaw says that the permit may be issued for a term of anywhere between 1 and 5 years. And I'm sure that 5 years will be the norm unless council knows of a good reason to limit the permit to a lesser term. But it would be helpful if the clause was reworded to that effect. It's probably not as critical to have a 5-year term for droving. However, because droving is done less frequently, it would certainly be more efficient and cost effective for all parties if droving permits were also issued for 5 years. I would like to draw your attention to condition 1 of the droving permit on page 65, which says only routes specified in the application are covered by the permit. Now, according to the staff report, identification of all routes is necessary to determine if a permit is required. Well, if a permit is not required, there will not be an application. It is the farmer who determines whether he applies for a permit by reading the terms of the bylaw and looking up the schedule of roads. So therefore, condition 1 is redundant. Can I suggest that the most important thing is not where the drover is going, it's his compliance with the safety conditions of the permit that matters. So if a farmer has a permit and something unexpected happens requiring a change in route, he doesn't have the luxury of waiting 10 days worked 10 working days while the new route is assessed and the permit is processed. So I would ask you as councillors to consider whether there's any merit in retaining this redundant provision, and I ask you to delete the clause. I support the track changes between pages 54 and 69, except for 2 of them. Now, the first refers to an error in the coloured matrix on page 66, which defines a sealed rural road as one where the speed limit, and it says in the bylaw at the moment, is less than 70 kilometres an hour. It should read more than 70 kilometres an hour. And if you want to know why, I can explain in question time. I think everyone's all over this now. The other was one just picked up since the track changes came out. So there's a clause that's been inserted since the draft went out for consultation. So it's on page 61, clause 16.2, under offences and penalties. And it reads that any person who fails to comply with the requirements of the bylaw commits an offence and may be liable to a penalty under the Local Government Act 2002. Now, I suggest that the clause be deleted because unless the law has changed, then it's incorrect to actually say that a breach will be liable to a penalty under the Local Government Act. Depending on the provisions that are breached, it might do. But most of the bylaw provisions are imposed through the empowering provisions of the Land Transport Act, 1998, not the Local Government Act. Now, the difference is that if you do breach a provision from the Local Government Act, your maximum fine could be potentially around 40 times more than if you breach a provision from the Land Transport Act. And that applies whether it's stated in the bylaw or not. So it doesn't need to be stated. And I don't think it adds clarity to the bylaw. I think it muddies the waters. And I'm thinking back to a case that would be over 10 years ago where the farmer pleaded guilty because it clearly stated in the bylaw that that they were working under the Local Government Act and that the maximum penalty was 20,000. Now he wasn't fined 20,000, but he was fined a lot more than 500, simply because he thought if it's in the bylaw, I must be guilty. So apart from these few things, I think this is a very workable bylaw, and I commend council for getting it to this point.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Are there any questions for the submitter? Councillor Beck.
Yes, thank you. I'm just interested in your comment in regards to a stock owner being permitted to supply their own signs, not only install them, but supply them because they may be able to access at lower cost. I don't disagree with the sentiment, but I'm sure you would agree that there needs to be some standard that they need to adhere to. I mean, they're there to advise road users who are used to seeing, the internationally adopted standard signs and so on, rather than, a hand-painted thing done as a school project by 3-year-olds. Any guidance if we were to follow your point here in terms of how we could ensure that farmer supplied signs are of an appropriate standard?
Yeah, thank you, councillor. And when Rosemary Costa comes on next, she will be more up to speed with what's available at the moment because she's using the crossing signs. I remember when we first were debating the bylaw 10 years ago, signs that looked the same as the ones that council were providing were available, but at a much lesser cost than what council was providing to stock owners. So the question would be, are those signs still publicly available? Because they would have to be consistent with the signs that council can provide. they'd have to be professional signs.
Thank you.
Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I very much enjoyed your presentation submission. It's obviously, as usual, exceptional, Wendy. My question is on your page, we've got another page 23 about the matrix. And it's a conversation around how many crossings per week, and you wanted to put it for average for the year, so I understand that. And I'm really thinking particularly around the high growth areas on the north, Waikato, and also around the Hamilton areas where there's rapidly changing vehicle counts on a lot of roads. That would be in the past, you're well aware of Franklin, so as an example, I'll give you one, which is Buckland Road between Tuakau and Pukekohe, rural road, but that traffic counts about 80,000 cars. So this is directly linked to those vehicle movements, but the matrix really doesn't have a reference back to those vehicle counts, and it can significantly change relatively quickly with a new subdivision. So I really want some thoughts as to what, and your experience around managing changes that can happen quite rapidly within, say, a 5-year period for a permit, as to your experience around those rapidly changing areas and the significant potential changes from on your matrix to the farmers and also to road safety for all users.
Yeah, so the farmer will be acutely aware if those vehicle movements start to increase a lot. The matrix has the definitions of the roads, and that includes the bands for the different vehicle movements per day. NZTA considers that anything under 500 vehicle movements a day is low volume. So and it's prohibited. It's prohibited if it's getting up, past 1,000. So there are actually bands there, but you might have to refer back to find out, what band a rural road fits into, or what a collector road fits into, or an arterial, and so on. But the farmer himself is going to be very aware of those traffic counts, increasing.
Right, and there's a traffic counts increase, or a re-estimated.
So, Councillor Church, I'm sorry, but we're well over time, and we are also now running late. Ms. Clark, thank you. Appreciate your thoughts, and it's always good to get extra little dimensions, and so that's the value of appearing with your submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Bevan, next on our list.
Yes, we have Rosemary Costa, and her submission can be found on page 24.
Thank you. Ms. Costa, you are nearly here. You are indeed here. Hello, and welcome. And my apologies for keeping you waiting. So thank you for that. As you know, we have all read your submission. I'm sure there's some questions for you. So the next 10 minutes, including questions, are all yours.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. Just while it's fresh in my mind, because I've had the easy job of sitting and watching everyone's submission on YouTube, I just wanted to cover a few questions that have come up. Someone asked about the permit being transferable. Clause 7.7 allows for that as long as the stock numbers and number of crossings remain the same. So that seems really reasonable. Councillor Smith, I support your suggestion of the 100-metre restriction either side for a crossing and the removal of the 400 metres for driving. The conversation around competency, I think as business owners, it's really up to us to make sure we are well protected. The thought of 8-year-olds on quad bikes brings just about tears to my eyes. And there is a restriction that quad bikes aren't to be used by anyone under 16. But for us, what we have in place is we have a stop crossing policy, and our employees all have to sign that. And we have a training record on them being trained crossing the cows, which they sign and we sign, so that if there was an accident, we are protected and our livestock are protected and our staff are protected because they have been trained correctly. And I think more and more businesses are getting up to speed with covering things like this. Councillor Beck, I think it was, talked about setting a standard for signage. And yeah, I fully support that. We could have gone to our local safety shop in Pukekohe and got exactly the same signs for less than half the price. That was 10 years ago. I'm not sure what the price is now. And Councillor Eyre, temporary signage, I know I see it too, both temporary and permanent being left open. On your page 65 of the bylaw, it talks about how the signage must be closed when stock is not on the road, and I fully support that remaining. So that's just a little summary of the questions I've heard, and now I'll just kick off with my one. Thanks for the opportunity to submit, and also thank you for your acceptance of many of our submission points in their addition to the latest draft bylaw. Much of what you've said today has already been covered, or what I'm about to say has already been covered by Fed's, Bruce and Wendy's submissions, and I wholeheartedly support each one. I also support the track changes to the bylaw that are attached to your meeting minutes, with the exception of 3 issues. One has already been covered, and that's the error in the wording on Appendix 3, the matrix. And you probably don't want me to go over it again, but quite simply, it should say roads greater than 70 kilometres and less than 200 cars. And that was in line with the NZTA 1 road network classification, and also in line with the discussions we had with Councillor Smith's working groups. Clause 11.1 allows councils to revoke a permit for non-compliance if the road status or hierarchy changes, or if any other relevant matters are considered appropriate. I support this clause in its entirety, but because of this clause, I submit that permits should be issued for 5 years, not 1 to 5 years. Issuing 5-year permits will reduce unnecessary costs for farmers, reduce council staff time issuing permits, but they will not jeopardise any safety aspect of the bylaw, and council still has clause 11.1 to close a crossing if it is so required. The third thing was the subsidy available to farmers installing an underpass on roads less than 500 vehicles a day. So council staff commented that the rationale for the 500 vehicle limit is for public benefit and to increase the safety benefit for the public. They stated on, I think, your page 74, that as the road use gets lower, there's very little public benefit, which is why the subsidy is not available. I do agree with this, but believe if that's the case, roads with less than 500 vehicles per day should not have to install underpasses. The proposed matrix is a vast improvement from the previous one, but it does still mean that a farmer crossing the road every day, regardless of his road count being 2 or 200, they must install an underpass. So my thoughts are that either every farmer should get the minimum subsidy of 25,000, or farmers on roads with traffic counts less than 500 should be exempt from installing an underpass as long as they meet every safety standard in the bylaw. Finally, just a topic that has been of interest is the signage. So we have 3 sets of permanent signs, and we absolutely support their use. It makes crossing really quick. You've just got to go open them and then close them again when you're finished. And you don't have to muck around with temporary signs. But the issue we have is vandalism. Our signs spend more time on the ground than they do being upright. And as soon as they're reinstated, they're torn down again. These wasteful acts of vandalism could lead to a serious accident for either road users, us, or our livestock. And I know there's nothing council can do about it, but I'm just seeking clarification that we're permitted to reinstall our signs rather than wait for council to install them. Our signs have been down since the end of January, and we've propped them up as best we could because our understanding is we can't actually reinstall them. But we would appreciate some clarification on that. And also, we'd appreciate any thoughts council's roading team has on how we can deter vandalism, not just to our crossing signs, but to all the signs in our area which are regularly torn down. So thank you all for hearing me today. I'd also like to thank Councillor Smith, Patterson and Wolverton for their time and knowledge working with us through the bylaw and our Feds team. And I believe we have got a really great outcome for all parties. So thank you very much. And any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Costa, and your comments are very, very welcome. So on behalf of that group, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yes, good morning, Rosemary. Just on the signs that you've raised, so what you're actually asking is that once council installs, and I take Mr. Cameron's comments on board, that if they, perhaps a meeting takes place with the permit holder to agree on the location for their initial installation, that would be good. Then they wouldn't have to be removed, but moved. But my point being is that if they are removed and thrown on the ground, which I think you've described, is that you would like the ability to resurrect those signs in the same location and the same layout that they are, and not have to wait days or maybe weeks for a council contractor to come and install them, which the bylaw currently suggests.
Yes, that's correct.
So no alteration, but just putting them back in place. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments or points of clarification needed from Ms. Costa? I think it looks as though you've been incredibly clear and everybody is well versed in this, so thank you very much. Ms. Bevan, our final submitter, thank you, Ms. Costa. Our final submitter, please.
Yes, our final submitter is Graham McBride, page 28 of the agenda, and just noting he has a couple of pictures that he'll be sharing by his screen.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. McBride, and welcome. The next 10 minutes are all yours. We have read your submission. We've had a very good summary this morning of many of the points. So the next 10 minutes are all yours.
Thank you, Chair Sedgwick, councillors and staff. Good morning. I have the unfortunate luxury, if that's the right word, of having stock crossing discussions with councils right back to 1988. So I've got quite a folder of various iterations of stock crossing permits and bylaws. I'd have to say that in general, this one's a big improvement of previous Waikato District versions, bearing in mind that we started off under Waipa County. Generally a big improvement, but there are some issues that need addressing. And what I'd suggest here from my point of view today is an old adage that where you sit on an issue depends where you're going to stand on it. And so council have written this, in my view, from the perspective of an enforcement position, whereas I'm on the receiving end of it. And so I have a quite a perhaps different interpretation of what the intentions are. So in terms of the proposals here for the background, 1974 through to 2002, we had a dairy crossing using this crossing you can see in the image for about 200 animals, 1 week in every 4. So it had an old score 21 under Waikato District's matrix. So it was a fairly low impact crossing. You can see there that there's a safety sign on the gate. There's quite good visibility, which you'll see in a minute. Again, to go back to the previous speaker with the vandalisms of the signs, you can see the SBN warning on the power pole. I bolted it to the power pole because I got sick of it getting trashed. So there may be some options there for self-help fixing. So since 2002 to present, we converted to dry stock. So we're in a position where we use this crossing perhaps 40 to 50 animals, smaller animals, once or twice in every 6 weeks. Excuse me. So that's something like about maybe 10 crossings a year. So on the scale of risk, it's minuscule. So I'd have to say in the 48 odd years that we've used it, we've never had an incident or a near miss or anything like that. We've been very cognizant of safety and responsibilities to the road users. So in terms of this one, it's actually got a sealed crossing margin on both sides of the road. Stop crossing sign, red amber light, red warning flag on a stretchy tape that goes up temporarily. 2 people at crossing. This is all for 40 or 50 heifers. And we've got an adjoining vehicle entrance, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that crossings remain unchanged for the last 30 years at least. So in previous correspondence from council, they state, and I can give you reference numbers if you wish. Here's one that says in October 2008, this means your crossing will be allowed to continue indefinitely. So I would suggest that my reading of that means that that's a forever permit that we got. And then in 2011, it stated this means your crossing will be allowed to continue, provide usage does not increase, or that all conditions are met. So I can interpret that we've got some existing use rights which should have some effect. So in the general overview of the writing of these past crossing bylaws and stop droving bylaws, there's been a lot of confusion between the droving function and the crossing function in the writing. Some of that confusion extends to the fact that the words have been used in the last iteration of diary instead of dairy in several occasions. And so that sort of suggests that whoever has been writing these bylaws in the past has not been particularly au fait with the culture of crossing stock and droving stock, which are 2 remarkably different products. This current one in Appendix 4 1.5 talks about the last bullet point as an objective to eliminate unsafe activities. It actually says in there, selimate, whatever that word is. It's beyond my capabilities in my dictionary. So some of that wordsmithing is continued through into this iteration. In terms of definitions there, you can have a look at those at your leisure. You've obviously read them and things. It's more about the interpretation from where I sit. I mean, stipulates removal excessive excrement. Well, that's totally open-ended definition. Most of the previous, so that's all right. Page, what have I got, 1 to 8, there's nothing apparent for the duration of the permit, especially in 9.0 livestock movement permit, up to a 5-year grant. And I think other submitters have touched on that, and I think that needs clarifying. Up to is pretty subjective. And turning to Appendix 2, conditions for stock moving permits. The first point, subsection 1, entranceways should be brown rock. Now, if you want to be really pedantic, our entranceways are tar sealed, even though there's grass growing on them. So does that mean they're non-compliant? I mean, if you're going to wordsmith this, you need to wordsmith it accurately. Others around the area have got concrete aprons, and it's becoming more fashionable. So there needs to be some allowance for that. Subsection 3, council will approve signs and install the last lot of stock signs we had replaced by council, the guy who, presumably it was a guy who installed them, must have been 7'6" tall, because I needed a step ladder to open them, and I've since had to modify them. So that's another sign of incompatibility between regulation and the actual real world. In Appendix 3, Figure 2, in the tables, in the permitted, so you have your prohibited, restricted, and permitted table. If you hit no in that permitted activity, there's nowhere else to go in it. You can't track across to something or other where you see is discussed with applicant, like in the middle table. So to me, it needs to be a way forward rather than a no. It needs to be some more in that table to give you some route to go through it. In terms of sight lines, Appendix 2, crossings, it talks about any new entrance shall be constructed to the TSG E3 standards. I would suggest that, from my limited knowledge, that the TSG E3 standards sight lines are 130 metres, yet on the crossing tables we come up with 170 metres. So it would be nice to have some consistency between a standard residential entrance and a stop crossing, because I can't really appreciate that there's an elevated risk between an accident of a road user with a motor vehicle or a kid on a bike or a truck coming out of an entrance. So in terms of our one, and I'll show you some photos in a minute, in terms of our specific entrance.
You're down to your last 2 minutes, Mr. McBride.
Okay, so in the lookup tables there, it says we have to have a 170 metre sight line. So if we flip to the next photo, you can see you can see that we don't qualify under the tables. However, for the last 20 or 30 years, the sight lines that we have had have been suitable and have been signed off on permits. So that's the sight line looking to the north. Oodles room, that's looking to the south. You can see the warning sign on the pole. That's about 130, 140 metres through the centre line, and it doesn't define where we measure it from. What we got to understand is the road limit on this has now been reduced by 20% from 100 to 80 k's. So one would have thought, if anything, the sight lines would have been reduced rather than extended. If you go further to the south, going north from the end of our property, you can see on the left there's a narrow road, narrowing road there in the middle. You can look at it on which, and then just after that, there's another sign, narrow road, carry on, double S bend, carry on, and so that takes you around to our stop crossing. So there's nowhere in the definitions that explains clearly to me that this road it's posted 80 km/h, but is it an 80 km/h road with the constraints of what's there? Appendix 1 states assess at 85% of the speed of passing vehicles, so that should be 85% of the 80 km/h, but it also states there's a minimum sight distance. So to me, that's potentially contradictory or unclear. So Appendix 4 states where sight lines are unacceptable, to be replaced by an underpass, which was the policy which was meant to be completed by 2018. And obviously for us, spending 100 or 150,000 on 10 minor crossings a year is absolutely ridiculous, and we don't even qualify for a summary anyway. So what I'm suggesting in summary, Madam Chair, is that there needs to be a site-specific focus on a crossing, and I've tried to illustrate that with our one that might work well on paper, but it needs to be addressed on the actual crossing itself. And I think there should be some consistency between the residential entrance sightline distances and livestock crossing distances. Thank you.
Thank you. We are out of time, but I will allow one question if anybody has one for Mr. McBride. No, it would appear, sir, that you've been very clear in what you've done. Thank you for the photographs. They're always really, really helpful. So thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. We appreciate that you do that as well.
Cheers.
Thank you. That are we now in? I understand we're live streaming. We have no more submitters to come, Ms. Bevan. There's no submitters now in the Zoom. Correct? They're all gone. Okay. So thank you. So I propose that we break now. Come back at 11 o'clock. I'm aware there are some questions that Ms. Ridling may wish to answer, and we'll address those at 11 o'clock. So I'll adjourn the meeting.